Hello and welcome to Media7. I'm Russell Brown. In this week's program, we'll hear from both sides of the Radio New Zealand funding debate. And later in the show, Jose Barbosa reports from Webstock, the place where the people who make our web pages go for their culture. But first, it's Newsmash time, and it was all about the radio. One News kicked it all off with a story about the government and broadcasting that for once wasn't about TVNZ.
One News can reveal the chairwoman and board members of Radio New Zealand could face the sack if they continue to defy requests to cut costs.
And then it was all on in the opinion stakes. The Greens' Sue Kedgley had a conspiracy theory.
The Minister has a conscious policy of trying to starve Radio New Zealand.
Helen Clark staged a stunning break with character by making her opinion known.
I think commercial has its place.
Treasurer Bill English used the Q&A program to have a crack at Doc and Radio New Zealand for manipulating the news media to gain public sympathy.
My advice to them is they can't wait this out, and if they focused a bit more on the services and a bit less on the politics, I'm sure they'd get ahead.
And rightly so. Everyone knows that's the government's job. Meanwhile, the commercial radio breakfast hosts piled in. Marcus Lush, whose excellent TV adventures have long been funded by the taxpayer, quaffed thus.
Make them play commercials, then there'll be a level playing field.
And Mike Hosking, a Morning Report veteran himself, vented mightily.
They're the only people in broadcasting who don't think whether anyone listens actually matters. If this had been produced by Radio New Zealand, it would have had 5 writers, 3 producers and been 2 months in the making, and would have had the humour taken out.
But perhaps the most notable media response came from the Facebook masses, 12,000 of whom signed up to the group Save Radio New Zealand in just a few days. They, in turn, were dismissed as lemmings by the country's most read blogger, David Farrar. While Broadcasting Minister Jonathan Coleman embraced with real vigour his role as the Minister for Vague Statements.
We're really looking for a change in mindset that acknowledges the reality of that fiscal environment.
And in other news, this is a video of some kittens. Because it is much better that you should watch kittens than watch a man die in that luge crash again. Well, we have no kittens tonight, but we do have the man who founded the Save Radio New Zealand Facebook group, Auckland University politics and media tutor, Jake Quinn, and the General Manager of Radio Live, Mitch Harris. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Well, obligatory small country disclaimer. I used to host a show on Radio New Zealand and I produce a show on Mitch's station, so now we can proceed. Jake,
hi. Let's
get this out of the way first. Matthew Hooton called you a Labour Party activist on 9 to Noon this week. Do you answer to that description?
Oh, I think that on some days of the year that might be fair.
Yes.
I used to work at Parliament for Labour ministers and members of Parliament, and I am a member of the party. But I set up this Facebook group for reasons totally outside of those. It's because I'm a big Radio New Zealand fan and I saw a threat and I wanted to do something about it.
But having been a parliamentary press secretary, I presume you know your way around the media. Did that help?
Oh, absolutely.
Were you surprised at the response?
Well, of course. You know, I came home last week and checked the news and saw that these comments had been made about some pretty drastic changes maybe on the cards for Radio New Zealand. It just really irked me, and I thought, this is not what I want for my state broadcaster. So I wrote a blog about it, as you do, and I went and set up a Facebook group. Didn't think anything would come of it. But, you know, in the morning there was 300 fans, 1,000 by the end of the day, and, you know, in a week, 14,000. People care about Radio New Zealand in this country.
Indeed. Is the name a little dramatic, though? Save Radio New Zealand. No one is suggesting that Radio New Zealand goes out of existence.
Oh, but you can save something from being ruined. You know, I think that with a political campaign like this, you need to set up some options for people, and that you can either be behind saving Radio New Zealand or you can be supportive of undermining it. It's a nice, clear decision for people to make.
Now, Mitch, you have another view, I'm presuming. Your breakfast host, Marcus Lush, suggested that if Radio New Zealand was to just start taking advertising, it would be a level playing field and everything would be all right. Do you share that view?
No, I don't actually. I can understand why Marcus said that, but no, we don't want them to start selling advertising. That's competition.
Yeah, well, it's a radio station.
It's tough out there as it is.
Has
everybody noticed that?
Listeners coming into that market.
Yeah, the advertising market's been pretty tough over the last year or two, and it's competitive in this country. So, you know, we're quite happy for them to be non-commercial.
Radio New Zealand says it can't cut its costs anymore without affecting services. What do you make of that? Because you run a fairly lean operation. Don't you?
No, I can't imagine that would be true. I think they could do a lot better. I think $38 million is a lot of money. You could do a lot with that, and I think there's a lot of
$38 million. Let's be clear, isn't the government funding?
Yeah,
they make $4 million of their own revenue.
Yeah. You got $38 million. You can make a lot of good programs with that. I think the problem there is that they're not spending that money on making programs. I think they've got a pretty big bureaucracy. I think they're overstaffed probably. And they could be doing a lot better.
I've got the KPMG report, which was commissioned by the Ministry of Culture and Heritage, CCMAO and NZ On Air. It didn't find that kind of wastage. It found that I think something like 2/3 of its wage bill is on production.
There's a lot of shade and fraud around last week. $6 million for Midnight to Dawn. Come on, give me a break, Russell. You know it doesn't cost $6 million to run Midnight to Dawn. I just think they could make better programs. I think they should spend the money on program making and come up with some great stuff. It'd be nice to see some more drama on Radio New Zealand. I think that there's a great body of New Zealand literature. We'd like to see more of that, probably. I think listeners would agree with that.
Well, and I think
they should get their act together and start spending money on programs.
They do make some really good programs, and I think if you ask the average Radio New Zealand listener about the things that they hold dear, Kim Hill's Saturday show, Morning Report, these are really important parts of people's lives, and they are great.
All the time,
but and your point that they could probably do better. No, absolutely. I don't resolve from that fact whatsoever.
Another saving I think they could make. Everybody's saying get rid of Concert FM. You don't have to get rid of Concert FM, but you don't need to spend all that money on a music station like that. You could automate that.
What's your split? I mean, what's your wage bill there? How much of it is?
Cost $5 million bucks about $5 million to run our news service and our programs. However, I would say that that's pretty tight, and we're gradually increasing the amount that we're spending. Nothing like that, but
But there's a respect in which you can afford to be a cost centre because you're a news hub for all the other radio work stations, aren't you?
Yeah. If I give you a little bit of background about Radio Live, essentially our objective is not to go broke. If you look at the history of people in New Zealand, taking on large media organisations, big brands, with that you look at TV3, they went broke. They came back again, but they went broke originally. Remember when the Sun took on the Herald? They went broke. So the initial objective is not to go broke, is to hang in there and then gradually increase and improve.
And that's actually why public service broadcasting and core state funding of that is so important. You don't want media to be at the risk of going broke. Because in a democratic society, it's really important that we've got these 4 pillars of democracy, and that's the executive government, the legislature, that's Parliament, and you've got your free press, and you've got your justice sector. And you need to protect media and actually have it state funded so that it doesn't go broke, because if it does, you actually start to erode your democracy.
Yeah, but I think it's fair to ask a question and say, what are we getting for this money? What are the taxpayers getting? Can they do better? And I think they can. I think this whining and whinging about $38 million is not enough. I think it's ridiculous.
If you look at all their qualitative research, it's actually the best that it's been in the station's history, in the broadcaster's history.
About 7 producers for every show.
I just don't think that's true.
Yeah.
They do.
And I have to say, Mitch, that you're focused on not going broke next year. The KPMG report has to look at whether Radio New Zealand is viable in 10, 20 and 30 years, whether it's covering its obligations. We're looking at 10 years of fiscal deficits. Surely Radio New Zealand, as a public entity, should have to do that too.
Absolutely. And, I would go as far as agreeing. I think that when Jonathan Coleman, we've given signalling that there's going to be no budget increases for 5 years, everyone accepts that, at least right now, because everyone's facing the same thing. If he had just come out, Bill English makes the rules, with his budget, and Radio New Zealand knows they're not going to get any money for 5 years, why don't leave it at that, right? Come out like he did last week with these, wacky suggestions that nobody wants, apart from perhaps Radio Live. He's just picking a political fight that he didn't need to, and I think he's taking a bit of punishment for it. His caucus MPs are getting
finance, for goodness sake. We're in a recession.
My point was that budget freezes for 5 years is probably acceptable. Why come out and pick a political fight that you didn't need to, and now you're taking a beating?
Well, actually, the one thing I thought was...
I don't know if they are taking
Well, their MPs are...
Sue Kedgley.
No.
Her brother-in-law does Sunday morning, so it's ridiculous.
Are raising this issue with Jonathan Coleman because they're getting hordes of emails from constituents upset about this.
And a lot of the people on your site seem to think it's deliberate. Sue Kedgley has the conspiracy theory as well, that it's a deliberate attempt to silence Radio New Zealand, to silence criticism. I can't see any evidence of that. I'm not sure if it's been particularly well handled. But the one thing that we did turn up was that both Bill English and Jonathan Coleman suggested that Concert FM could help pay its way by taking advertising or sponsorship.
Automate it. Way to go. Seriously, it would sound better.
Don't we have enough? Do we not
better.
have enough robot radio?
Well, it's just playing music.
Mm.
You know?
The question I have
what do you want DJs to talk
Coleman
about?
and English reading their own legislation.
Well, this is the thing. Let's talk about the Radio New Zealand Amendment Bill. Came into effect last month with Coleman's name on it. One of the key amendments to the existing legislation was to specifically say that neither of those stations is allowed to take advertising or sponsorship. So they're arguing for something that they legislated against last month.
And this is particularly why I think this is actually foolish political management from Coleman, because he didn't need this fight, and his own government's legislation rules it out. What's he doing?
So it's cock up over conspiracy on that front.
Yeah, cock up over conspiracy.
Yeah.
Oh, look, I mean, you know, I'm not a National Party or Labor Party support any of them, but you know, I will say one thing. I mean, I've met Coleman a few times. I mean, he seems to be genuinely interested in what's going on. He asks good questions. He's a good listener. I mean, I think he's pretty good.
What do you make of?
We've talked. Melissa Lee might not agree.
Yeah, we've talked about the sponsorship. Now that's very political, and you should stop that right away. We talked about the sponsorship thing without saying whether it was a good idea. Would you be happy with modest, tasteful sponsorship on Concert FM? Is that relevant?
No, because I think that the channels under the Radio New Zealand banner should be commercial and sponsorship free forever. That's the end of it.
And you're much more on the side that they should cut costs rather than they should raise extra revenue, because anything they do with sponsorship comes out of your pie, doesn't it?
I think that I think they could operate a lot more efficiently and make better programs, spend more money on programming. They could probably contract out a lot of stuff. I think that there's a lot of independent producers and things around now. They make good material. They can oversee that sort of thing. I just think that they just won't live within, you know, what is a reasonable budget. 38 mil is a lot of money.
But even KPMG found that if you talk to Radio New Zealand staff, they'll say they're not well paid.
Well,
they really aren't. I know a few that work there, and I used to work in the
staff.
public service in Wellington and get paid considerably more than my friends with years' experience working at Radio New Zealand.
What would be interesting is to actually look at staff numbers and who's involved in making programs and who's actually directly involved, and how many they have for. I mean, you know, we do programs that are comparable to what they do, just as good, better, with, you know, a quarter of the staff.
I think the 14,000 people who've signed up to Save Radio New Zealand would disagree wholeheartedly with that.
Yeah, but they don't know how the business is run. They don't know how things go behind the scenes.
No, they would disagree with the fact that your shows are better.
Oh, what one in particular? I mean, we produce weekend shows like the same as Radio New Zealand. We produce those shows, and we don't have the same numbers to do it.
But through the week, I must say, you make mostly talkback radio, which is a very, very cheap form.
No, well, actually, I'll correct you on that. We are the only news talk station that has 3 produced news shows a day. So we have obviously a breakfast program, we have a lunchtime program, and we have a drive time program. So no, I know that we run more talkback and that they can't do talkback, but hey, 5 million to 38 million. Boy, I tell you what, I could take half of that and I could produce a lot of really good shows.
Now, there's a wider issue here. TVNZ released its half-yearly report this week. It didn't look good. They're saying they're going to make a 1-year loss. Do you have fears about public service broadcasting in general, Jake?
Absolutely, and with the removal of the charter on TVNZ, I mean, it wasn't particularly successful under the last government, and then it was scrapped under this one. I mean, it has been good to see TVNZ, for instance, expanding channels like this one, and that's a positive move. But in this commercialised media environment, where the priority is not news but profit, yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot of risks around public service broadcasting.
What do you make of that, Mitch? Because you fought hard in a difficult market against big opponents. How do you see public broadcasting fitting in?
Well, I think I've always actually felt quite sorry for TVNZ, to be honest. I think they've always suffered from conflicting objectives, and I think it was really tough for them to try and operate under the charter and then have to return a dividend to taxpayer. One thing I know about running companies and businesses is that you have got to have a clear objective. When you've got 2 conflicting objectives, you can't do it. And I think, even though the charter is gone, still think there's that problem there.
So your job's a bit simpler.
Yeah.
Just briefly, Jake, where to from here?
Oh, I mean, Radio New Zealand needs more money, not less. And, yeah, that's the long and the short of it.
Right, well, that's the end of this discussion, but not, I would say, by a long chalk of the debate itself. Thank you to Jake Quinn and Mitch Harris.
Thank you.
After the break, just what is Webstock?